3 weeks had passed since the second diplomatic meeting, and the strain on Zephyrian society was reaching critical levels. The human fleet maintained its position at the edge of the system, a constant reminder of the threats and promises hanging over the planet. Daily communications from Admiral Chen grew increasingly insistent, requesting answers to their proposals while making thinly veiled references to the fleet's continued presence. In the depths of Lumicrest, the Council of Harmony convened in emergency session. The holographic displays around them showed statistics that painted a picture of a civilization tearing itself apart from within. Psychological casualties are approaching 30% of the adult population, Chief Healer Jothvaren reported, her normally serene demeanor cracked with exhaustion. The constant suppression of empathic responses, the need to maintain aggressive postures, the stress of perpetual deception, it's breaking our people. The children are suffering the most, added Educator Harmonist Thalves, her voice heavy with sorrow. They don't understand why they're being taught to hide their feelings, to lie about their nature, to fear contact with others. We're seeing regression, anxiety disorders, even cases of selective mutism. Elder Zephyronin studied the medical reports with growing alarm. They had known the deception would be costly, but they hadn't anticipated the sheer scale of psychological damage. An entire generation was being taught that their natural empathy and openness were weaknesses to be hidden. The consciousness network is becoming unreliable, reported network harmonist Quelthera. The constant flow of deceptive information is interfering with genuine emotional connection. People are beginning to lose the ability to distinguish between performed aggression and real feelings. Some communities are reporting complete breakdown of social cooperation, added Counselor Morthes. When people can't trust the emotions they're sharing through the network, they begin to withdraw from collective consciousness entirely. The reports painted a picture of a society in collapse. The very traits that made Zephyrian civilization beautiful, their empathy, their cooperation, their emotional transparency, were being systematically destroyed by the need to maintain their deception. We can't continue like this, Counselor Lythandra said quietly. If we don't end the deception soon, there won't be a Zephyrian civilization left to save. And if we do end it, Counselor Tambarian pointed out, there won't be any Zephyrians left at all. The moment the humans discover what we really are, they'll move from diplomatic contact to biological harvesting. The impossible dilemma remained unchanged. They were destroying themselves to avoid being destroyed by others, slowly becoming something alien in order to prevent their extinction. What if we told them the truth? Suggested Counselor Veltharian desperately. Revealed our peaceful nature, appealed to whatever conscience they might possess? The historical archive suggests that would be suicide, Zephyronin replied sadly. Humans respond to peaceful species as wolves respond to sheep. Our gentleness would only make us more attractive targets for exploitation. Then what do we do? Lythandra asked. We can't maintain the deception much longer, but we can't abandon it either. We're trapped. The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice from the chamber's communications system. HFY, monitoring the situation from the observatory, was transmitting urgent information through the consciousness network. Elders, counselors, we have a new development. The human fleet is receiving reinforcements. The holographic displays immediately shifted to show long-range sensor data. Additional ships were approaching the system, not just more warships, but vessels with different configurations and energy signatures. Medical ships, Dexterian identified with growing dread. Research vessels, laboratory ships, biological containment facilities. They're preparing for the medical exchange they proposed. How many? Zephyronin asked. 7 additional vessels, arriving within 48 hours. And according to their communications, HFY paused, his voice tight with fear. They're expecting to begin preliminary biological assessments of the Zephyrian population within the week. The final trap was closing. The humans had grown tired of waiting for formal agreements, and were preparing to begin their research programs with or without explicit Zephyrian consent. They'll discover everything, Lyranis said through the network from her position in the Cultural Adaptation Center. The moment they get biological samples from our people, They'll know we're not the warrior species we've been pretending to be. And then? Counselor Tambarian asked, though he dreaded the answer. Then the diplomacy ends, Zephyronin replied grimly. Admiral Chen has been treating us as equals because she believes we're dangerous. When she learns we're actually helpless, the Terran colonial fleet will show its true nature. The consciousness network buzzed with rising panic as the implications spread across the planet. 12 million peaceful souls faced the prospect of their greatest fears being realized, not quick conquest, but slow biological exploitation that would steal the very essence of what made them Zephyrian. We need to make a decision, Counselor Morthes said finally. Continue the deception and watch our society collapse from within, or end it and face whatever the humans do to us. There might be a third option, said a new voice. Cultural specialist Ruthvalen entered the chamber, his expression carrying something that might have been hope or might have been madness. Explain, Zephyronin commanded. What if we don't just pretend to have weapons? What if we actually create them? The suggestion sent shock waves through the consciousness network. Creating actual weapons was so far beyond Zephyrian ethical boundaries that the concept seemed impossible to grasp. We don't have the knowledge, the resources, or the time, Counselor Veltharian protested. Weapon development requires expertise we simply don't possess. Do we? Ruthvalen asked. I've been studying our technology, really studying it, not just the peaceful applications we've always focused on. Our consciousness network can coordinate millions of minds instantly. Our biotechnology can create living organisms that interface directly with electronic systems. Our energy manipulation can produce effects on a planetary scale. Those are tools of creation and communication, Lythandra pointed out. Not destruction. Every tool can be used for multiple purposes, Ruthvalen pressed. A hammer can build or destroy. The question is intent. He activated a holographic display showing theoretical applications of Zephyrian technology. The consciousness network reconfigured to disrupt enemy electronics instead of sharing emotions. Biotechnology designed to create aggressive organisms instead of symbiotic ones. Energy systems focused to cause destruction instead of creating beauty. It would be monstrous, Counselor Morthes whispered. Everything we've built, everything we believe in, corrupted into instruments of violence. And it might not even work, added Vextarian practically. Even if we could develop such weapons, we have no experience using them. The humans are a warrior species with millions of years of combat experience. But we would have surprise, Ruthvalen argued. They think they know what our capabilities are. If we could create actual weapons and deploy them before they realize what's happening. We're talking about starting a war, Zephyronin said quietly. Not just resisting conquest, but actively attacking another species. It goes against everything we are. Does it? Ruthvalen challenged. Or does it go against everything we've chosen to become? Our ancestors fought for survival. They developed the biological and technological capabilities that eventually allowed us to transcend conflict. But the potential for violence is still there, buried under 3,000 years of peaceful evolution. The debate raged through the consciousness network for hours, splitting the planetary population between those who saw weaponization as their only hope and those who viewed it as the destruction of everything they valued. Finally, Elder Zephyronin called for silence. The decision cannot be made by debate alone, he said. We need to know if what Ruthvalen suggests is even possible. I propose a limited research program, not to build weapons, but to determine if we could build them if necessary. A feasibility study, Counselor Tambarian clarified. To understand our options before committing to any course of action. The compromise was reluctantly accepted, but it marked another step down a path that led away from everything Zephyrian civilization had believed about itself. As research teams began analyzing the destructive potential of their peaceful technologies, the last traces of their innocence started to crumble. Meanwhile, the human fleet continued its approach, bringing with it the machinery of biological exploitation and the promise of horrors that would make slavery seem merciful by comparison. The Zephyrians had 48 hours to decide what they were willing to become in order to survive. And as they contemplated the transformation of their tools of creation into instruments of destruction, they began to understand that some prices for survival might be too high to pay. The breaking point was approaching, and when it arrived, it would shatter not just their deception, but their fundamental understanding of who they were as a species. The research proceeded with desperate intensity, as Zephyrian scientists worked around the clock to analyze the destructive potential of their peaceful technologies. In laboratories that had never known the purpose of violence, brilliant minds struggled to comprehend concepts that violated everything they had been taught to value. The consciousness network modifications are theoretically possible, reported Chief Network Harmonist Veiltherin, her voice heavy with reluctance. We could reconfigure the resonance patterns to disrupt electronic systems rather than facilitate emotional sharing. The range would be limited, but within that range, the effects would be substantial. Define substantial, Elder Zephyronin requested, though he dreaded the answer. Complete electromagnetic failure. Ships would lose power, life support would fail, communication systems would go dark. Any human vessel within the network's influence would become a dead hulk floating in space. The clinical description masked the horrific reality. They were discussing the systematic murder of thousands of beings, the deliberate infliction of death on creatures whose only crime was following their own species' evolutionary nature. The biological weapons program shows similar potential, added bioharmonist Kelthvaren, his blue skin pale with distress. Our organism design capabilities could produce aggressively invasive species, viruses, bacteria, parasitic organisms that could target human physiology specifically. Casualties? Counselor Tamberian asked, his voice barely a whisper. Total. We could create biological agents that would be universally fatal to human physiology while leaving other species unaffected. Their entire fleet would be eliminated within days of exposure. And the energy weapons? Lyranus inquired, though she already knew the answer would be equally devastating. Our planetary energy coordination systems could produce focused destructive harmonics, confirmed energy harmonist Thelkavis. We could literally tear their ships apart at the molecular level, or create energy discharges that would burn through their hulls like paper. The feasibility reports confirmed what Rethvalen had suspected. Hidden within their peaceful technologies lay the potential for weapons of mass destruction that could eliminate the human threat entirely. They possessed the capability to save themselves through the complete annihilation of their enemies. The question, said Elder Zephyronin quietly, is whether we possess the will to use such capabilities. The debate that followed would define the future of Zephyrian civilization. Through the consciousness network, 12 million peaceful souls wrestled with the fundamental question of their nature. Were they inherently nonviolent, or had they simply chosen nonviolence because it had never been truly tested? We have the right to defend ourselves, argued Counselor Tamberian, his thoughts carrying the weight of desperate conviction. The humans intend to harvest us, to steal our genetic heritage and reduce us to laboratory specimens. That's not conquest, it's violation on the most fundamental level. Self-defense, yes, replied Counselor Lythandra. But wholesale slaughter? The murder of thousands of beings who are only following their evolutionary nature? How does that differ from what they plan to do to us? Intent, suggested Network Harmonist Veiltherin. We would be killing to preserve our freedom and our species. They would be killing to satisfy their desire for biological resources. The dead don't care about intent, Counselor Morthes pointed out with bitter clarity. Murder is murder, regardless of justification. And extinction is extinction, Rethvalen countered. Whether by weapons or by biological harvesting, the end result is the same, the complete destruction of Zephyrian civilization. The arguments raged for hours, dividing the population along lines that had never existed before. Some advocated for the use of their newfound weapons capabilities, viewing it as the only way to ensure survival. Others argued for continued diplomatic solutions, believing that even the risk of exploitation was preferable to becoming killers. Still others proposed revealing the truth about their nature and hoping for human mercy. There is another consideration, Elder Zephyronin said finally, his ancient voice cutting through the debate. what we become if we choose violence. Even if we succeed in destroying the human fleet, even if we save ourselves from biological harvesting, what kind of species will we be afterward? Alive, Tambarian replied simply. But at what cost? Our children are already suffering psychological damage from maintaining our deception. If we actually use weapons, if we commit genocide to preserve ourselves, what will that do to our collective soul? We'll adapt, suggested bioharmonist Kelthvaren. Species do what they must to survive. Our peaceful nature developed because it served our evolutionary needs. If violence serves those needs now, perhaps it's time to evolve again. Into what? Lythandra asked. Into the very thing we're trying to defend ourselves against? Into predators who justify killing by claiming necessity? The debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from the observatory. Kale Thys's voice carried new urgency as he reported the latest intelligence. The human medical ships have arrived and are taking up position in the outer system. Admiral Chin is transmitting a final diplomatic message, requesting an immediate response to their proposals. What kind of timeline are they giving us? Zephyronin asked. 12 hours. They're citing operational requirements and resource allocation schedules. If we don't provide a definitive answer within 12 hours, they're going to begin preliminary medical assessments with or without formal agreements. The ultimatum crystallized their situation. In 12 hours, human medical teams would begin taking biological samples from Zephyrian citizens. The moment that happened, their true nature would be revealed, and the diplomatic phase of the encounter would end. So we decide now, Lyranus said through the network. Use our weapons against them, agree to their proposals, or reveal the truth and hope for mercy. There's one more option, suggested a new voice. Communication harmonist Yethlara had been monitoring human transmissions, and her discovery added a new dimension to their choices. Explain, Zephyronin commanded. I've been analyzing their internal communications, the signals between ships that they think we can't intercept. The medical teams aren't just here for research, they're here for extraction. Extraction? According to their classified communications, they've already decided that Zephyrian biological capabilities are too valuable to leave in our control. The medical assessments are a pretext. They plan to remove significant portions of our population for detailed study in their research facilities. The revelation sent waves of horror through the consciousness network. The humans weren't just planning to study them, they were planning to kidnap them on a massive scale. How many? Counselor Veltharian asked. Conservative estimates suggest they want to remove at least 10% of our population initially, with additional extractions based on research results. They're talking about establishing permanent breeding programs to ensure continuous access to Zephyrian genetics. The words hit the collective consciousness like physical blows. Breeding programs. The reduction of their people to livestock, their children born into captivity for the purpose of biological exploitation. That decides it, Tambarian said, his mental voice carrying deadly resolve. They've already declared war on us. We're simply choosing to fight back. But the moral cost, Lythandra began, is irrelevant compared to the alternative, Tambarian interrupted. They want to turn us into breeding stock, into biological resources to be harvested and exploited. There is no moral equivalence between killing soldiers and allowing our children to be born into slavery. The debate continued, but something fundamental had shifted. The revelation of human plans for breeding programs had moved the discussion from theoretical ethics to visceral survival instincts. Even the most peaceful Zephyrians struggled to argue for mercy toward beings who viewed their children as future laboratory specimens. We vote, Elder Zephyronin declared finally. A planetary referendum through the consciousness network. Every adult citizen chooses, do we use our weapons against the human fleet, or do we allow them to proceed with their medical assessments? The vote proceeded with the solemnity of a funeral rite. 12 million Zephyrians connected through their consciousness network, sharing not just their choices but their fears, their hopes, and their anguish at being forced to make such a decision. When the results were tallied, the outcome was decisive but not overwhelming. 7.2 million votes for the use of weapons, 4.6 million for attempting continued diplomacy, 200,000 abstentions. The decision is made, Zephyronin announced with profound sadness. We implement the weapons programs. May the universe forgive us for what we're about to become. As preparations began for the transformation of their peaceful technologies into instruments of destruction, every Zephyrian understood that they were crossing a line from which there might be no return. They were choosing to survive by becoming killers, to preserve their civilization by corrupting its fundamental nature. The next 12 hours would determine whether they remained Zephyrians or became something else entirely, something that could kill without mercy to protect what they loved. In the end, perhaps that was the most human thing about them. 6 months after the Battle of Zephyria, Elder Zephyronin stood in the rebuilt Observatory of Cosmic Harmony, his ancient eyes surveying a world that bore little resemblance to the paradise it had once been. The city still glowed with bioluminescence, but the light was harsher now, more purposeful. Where once flowing artistic spires had reached toward the sky, now angular structures served as defensive installations. The planet had survived, but at a cost that was still being calculated. The memorial gardens are nearly complete, Lyranus reported as she joined him at the observation deck. Her blue skin bore new markings, scars from the consciousness overload that had occurred during the battle, when 12 million minds had focused their collective will on the destruction of the human fleet. How many did we lose? Zephyronin asked, though he already knew the answer. 437 Zephyrians died from neurofeedback during the consciousness network weapon deployment. Another 1,000 suffered permanent psychological damage. And... She paused, her voice heavy with sorrow. We estimate 1,200 children have been so affected by the violence that they may never fully develop normal empathic responses. The numbers were devastating for a species that had not experienced violent death in 3 millennia. Each casualty represented not just an individual loss, but a crack in the foundation of everything they had believed about themselves. And the humans? Complete fleet destruction. 47 warships, 7 medical vessels, estimated crew of 82,000. No survivors. The consciousness network weapons had been horrifyingly effective. The coordinated electromagnetic pulse had disabled the human ship's electronics while the biological weapons had eliminated their crews. The energy weapons had then systematically destroyed the hulks to ensure no evidence of Zephyrian capabilities survived. It had been a massacre of unprecedented efficiency, carried out by a species that had never before taken a life in anger. Any word from the Terran Colonial Administration? Zephyronin inquired. Nothing yet. Our long-range sensors show increased activity in their border regions, but no signs of another expedition being organized. The complete loss of the fleet seems to have convinced them that Zephyria is too dangerous to approach. The deception had worked perfectly. The humans now believed that Zephyria was defended by weapons so advanced that they could eliminate entire fleets without warning. The planet's reputation in the galactic databases had shifted from approach with caution to avoid at all costs. They were safe. But the price of that safety haunted every moment of their continued existence. The psychological rehabilitation programs are showing some progress, Lyranus continued, trying to find hope in the darkness. Most of the adults who participated in the weapons deployment are responding to therapy. The nightmares are decreasing, the empathy suppression is gradually reversing. And the children? That's more difficult. An entire generation has been taught that their natural emotional responses are weaknesses to be hidden. That empathy is a vulnerability rather than a strength. Some of them. She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Some of them prefer the new way, Zephyronin completed sadly. They find it easier to live without the constant awareness of others' emotions. They're more comfortable with emotional isolation than connection. It was the cruelest irony of their survival. In saving themselves from human exploitation, they had created a generation of Zephyrians who were more like humans, emotionally isolated, comfortable with deception, capable of viewing violence as a necessary tool. The Council has been debating whether to maintain the defensive installations, Lyranus said, changing the subject to more immediate concerns. The consensus network weapons, The biological warfare laboratories, the energy weapon arrays. They are functional now, and some argue we should keep them in case other threats emerge. And others argue that maintaining such capabilities corrupts our nature even further. Zephyronin observed. What do you think? Lyranis was quiet for a long moment, her large eyes reflecting the harsh light of the militarized city below. I think we're no longer the species that could make that decision purely on ethical grounds. We've learned what it means to be afraid, to face extinction, to choose survival over principles. We can't unlearn those lessons. So we keep the weapons. We keep the capability to create weapons if necessary. But we also work to heal the damage they've caused to our society. We remember what we were, even as we accept what we've become. Through the vast windows of the observatory, they could see the daily life of Zephyria continuing. Children played in parks that bore monuments to the war dead. Artists created harmonies that spoke of sorrow and survival rather than pure joy. Scientists pursued research that could serve peaceful or military purposes depending on need. There's something else, Lyranis said quietly. The deep space monitoring arrays have detected signals from other systems. Other species that may have heard about what happened here. Hostile signals? No. Requests for contact. It seems that word has spread about a peaceful species that successfully resisted human expansion. Several civilizations want to discuss defensive alliances, technology sharing, mutual protection agreements. The irony was not lost on either of them. Their act of violence had earned them a reputation as protectors of the peaceful, defenders of the weak against the strong. Species across the galaxy were looking to them for leadership in resisting human expansion. And how do we respond to such requests? Zephyronin asked. How do we teach others to defend themselves when the lesson cost us our souls? Maybe that's the point, Lyranis suggested. Maybe the price we paid gives us the authority to help others avoid paying the same cost. We know what it means to choose survival over principle. Perhaps that knowledge can help other species find better alternatives. As they spoke, the consciousness network carried the emotional resonance of their conversation to millions of other Zephyrians across the planet. The collective response was complex: sorrow for what they had lost, relief for what they had preserved, determination to build something new from the wreckage of their innocence. The children who were born after the battle, Zephyronin said suddenly. How are they developing? Differently, Lyranis admitted. They seem to have a natural wariness that we never possessed, an instinctive understanding of danger that our species had lost. But they're also developing new forms of empathy, not just for their own kind, but for other species facing similar threats. Evolution in real time, Zephyronin mused. We're becoming something new, something that incorporates both our peaceful heritage and our violent awakening. Is that necessarily bad? I don't know. Ask me in 1,000 years, when we see what we've grown into. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the monitoring systems. HFY Sci's voice carried through the consciousness network with news that would shape their future once again. Long-range sensors are detecting approaching ships. Unknown configuration, but the energy signatures don't match any species in our databases. Through the observatory's enhanced sensors, they could see the distant fleet, sleek vessels that moved with an alien grace, their approach cautious but deliberate. Are they hostile? Lyranis asked. Unknown. But they're broadcasting a message on standard diplomatic frequencies. Universal mathematical sequences, then what appears to be gratitude. Gratitude? The translation algorithms suggest they're thanking us for showing the way and proving that resistance is possible. They're requesting permission to establish diplomatic contact. Elder Zephyronin looked out at the approaching ships, then down at the transformed world below. 6 months ago, they had been a peaceful species living in isolation, creating beauty and pursuing wisdom. Now they were reluctant warriors, protectors of the weak, leaders of what appeared to be a growing resistance movement against human expansion. Send the standard greeting protocols, he decided. But maintain defensive readiness. We've learned that the galaxy is more dangerous than we ever imagined, and more full of hope than we dared believe. Lyranis added, watching the distant ships approach with something that might have been optimism. As Zephyria prepared for its first voluntary diplomatic contact since the war, the consciousness network hummed with new purpose. They were no longer the innocent species that had once called this world home. But they were also no longer helpless. They had learned to fight, to kill, to make the hard choices that survival demanded. But they had also learned something else, that sometimes the greatest act of love is the willingness to sacrifice your own innocence to protect those who still possess theirs. The azure dawn that had once symbolized Zephyrian peace now carried new meaning. It was the dawn of a harder world, a more complex galaxy, a future where beauty and violence would forever walk hand in hand. But it was still dawn. Still beautiful. Still full of possibility. And in the end, perhaps that was enough.